My name's Adrian Baschnonga. I'm lead analyst for global telecommunications at EY. Today I'm at European Communications and I'm going to be talking about striking the right balance between partnerships and in-house innovation. I'm going to be talking a little bit about partnerships, in-house innovation, and really looking at how this whole notion of partnering for innovation, how it's affecting sort of telcos at large, really. It's not a new concept. Telcos have been doing it for years. Probably what's changed really in recent years, telcos are a little bit more willing to partner with each other. But if we think about it from a digital content perspective, we can see that there's a very complex environment and it's getting increasingly so. So probably just worth thinking a little bit about where the telco sector is at, a sort of a bit of a high level view here. What are we seeing in the industry? Well, we're seeing operators as keen as ever to move into new growth segments, okay? So really looking for new sources of growth. However, we're also seeing consolidation. Investors probably really understand the merits of consolidation a lot better than the merits of moving into new growth areas, often at great expense to telcos, if you look at some of the premium content acquisition costs. Probably draw your attention to a couple of charts there at the bottom of the page. You've got selected TMT segments. You can see cloud infrastructure services set for strong growth. Mobile advertising, absolutely huge growth, a very high growth space. I think today we've talked a lot about digital content, but we haven't talked too much about advertising. Okay, and if you look at, let's say, Verizon's acquisition of AOL, 4.4 billion US, that's a lot less than the 160 billion AOL Time Warner deal of 2000. Rationale for that deal very much predicated on advertising-led business models, right? So not consumers paying for content. You look at AOL's kind of content empire, quite interesting, and again, some of the advertising technologies it's got there. But the big issue for telcos, unsurprisingly, and it's been this way for a long time, is pressure on profits. Right, so on the bottom right there, you've got return on invested capital for telcos, whether that's in Europe or Asia Pacific, and you can see it's trending down. Now in Europe, we'd kind of expect that. A lot of macroeconomic pressure, 100 operators owned by 40 groups serving 500 million people, pressure to consolidate. You'd expect that, but even in Asia Pacific, and actually operators there more willing to dip their hands in their pockets and move sideways into adjacent growth segments, that's trending down. So profitability is under pressure, right? So monetizing content has to be top of mind. If we think about the ecosystem, we can see this isn't actually a problem confined to telcos, right? So we often think about telco versus OTT and we think, okay, it's the telco that's suffering. We look at other parts of the value chain, and here what I've done is sort of divided up mobile industry revenues by value chain entity, and you can see telcos, they're still the kings of the jungle. They're just about, with 55% share. But you look at device vendors, they're static on 20%. You look at HTC, a smartphone manufacturer, removed from the Taiwan main stock index, share price down 66% this year. You look at the infrastructure and platform vendors to the far left, 5% share. You look at ongoing consolidation, right? Looking at Nokia Networks, Alcatel Lucent, a good example. It's the OTT guys and actually the retailers who are the ones growing in this value chain, right? And in the case of OTTs, that's from zero to hero, in a decade. So these guys are putting pressure on absolutely everybody at the minute. Now I'm just going to dive into a few results from a survey that we conducted at EY. It's fresh out, came out this month actually. And it's a survey of industry leaders across telcos. You can see the stats there. Over 40 interviews took place. In terms of the total revenue accounted for by the representatives of those organizations, it's a whopping 670 billion US, and the market cap nearly $1 trillion. That's probably before the Chinese stock market crashed, but even so, it's a reasonably large number. And again, in terms of the sort of makeup of the interviewees, CEOs, CFOs, chairmen and others, often chief strategy officers, we asked them, a number of questions, both about what their strategic priorities were, but also how they saw the wider industry developing. And we sort of kicked off with what are the most significant challenges facing the industry. And actually, whether it's looking at all markets, so globally, or just looking at developed markets, which is Europe, North America in the case of this survey, disruptive competition right out there in front, right? So what's keeping telcos awake at night? It is actually the OTT phenomenon, right? It is disruptive competition. They are still concerned about it, right? So disruptive competition, regulatory certainty. What's maybe quite interesting, and I'll probably move on to later, is poor rates of innovation. Only 13% of telcos see that as an issue. So does that place a premium on partnerships, right? Have telcos decided that they can't innovate and they need to partner? So disruptive competition coming out very, very strongly there. And I've put a few quotes on these pages, but new points of disruption are in sight in terms of retail and distribution. The soft SIM is disruptive. What you're selling and distributing will change in basic connectivity, let alone additional services. Right? And so if you look at the OTT phenomenon, we think about it as over-the-top services riding over networks, right? But if you look at what Google's investing in, Project Loon, running fiber in Kansas City, you're actually looking at OTTs getting into the infrastructure game, so to speak. So operators, they certainly recognise the dynamic role played by OTTs. And again, we're sort of drilling into this issue of disruptive competition. Which types of industry actor are most likely to alter customer demand scenarios in the future? OTT app providers, 91 and 93%, depending on the geography, saying these are the guys driving change. But a range of responses, and this explains, do I partner? Am I competing? What's the rationale for my engagement with the over-the-top landscape? Web giants are having a huge influence on how consumers discover, purchase and obtain support. Another operator saying, we are planning a big step into OTT and will be the first player in the country to make this step. So telco is actually acting as over-the-top players themselves. And if we look at the sort of OTT environment and how operators are interacting with them, we can see that there's a shift. Yes, there have been partnerships for a few years. Some data from Ovum there on the bottom left, just showing a breakdown of OTT and operator tie-ups. Okay, and on the right there, you've got deals, tie-ups, agreements from the first half of 2015, and the dark grey portion is around video services. Right? And if you look at it in an overall context, you can see actually, since these partnerships began, video a smaller share of the pie. So these video-oriented deals are now really picking up. And what are telcos thinking about in terms of their own revenue growth priorities? Well, 50% of developed market telcos see TV and video as a top 3 revenue growth drivers. The others are actually cloud and also advertising and e-commerce. Right, so video content, really important. You can see that both in the cloud domain, in terms of end user battle for the home type services, but also that shift in the business model to advertising. That's a real growth driver for telcos right now. But partnerships are just one route really to sort of adapting to this ever wider ecosystem, right? So probably what we're talking about when we talk about sort of Netflix tie-ups, we're talking about sort of tailored tariffs, broadly speaking, joint product promotion. But there is a lot of in-house OTT app development going on. There's also a lot of VC funding, a lot of venture capital arms now working more closely with innovation and accelerator programs on a global basis. Now, all of these have pluses and minuses, advantages and disadvantages. The joint product promotion, that's great as a defensive move, right? That's great as a loyalty driver. Okay, but what's the long-term impact of that? Potentially margin erosion, potentially brand dilution. Okay, even if you look at some of these innovation and accelerator programs, they've made sort of big waves in the last 2-3 years. Problem there, how do you scale that up, right? How do you take that outside of one geography? Telcos have footprints in many markets. How do you consistently roll that out across a number of geographies, for example? And you've also got new business unit creation. Okay, Telefonica Digital probably a sort of poster child of that a few years back, driven out of the UK. It's now been folded back into O2, right? But if you look at Asian operators, Singtel, for example, Telstra, some of them actually getting into building new business units that obviously impact on the organisational structures at large. So going back to our survey, we'd probably say that telcos aren't taking full advantage right now of ecosystem opportunities. And again, when we asked, what are your strategic priorities over the next 3 years, customer experience management comes out number one, emphatically. Cost control, business efficiencies, network upgrades, unsurprisingly, also in that top three. But when we ask about new services development, acquiring and retaining talent, M&A, joint venture and partnerships, all of those things which you'd see as big tools to engaging with this wider ecosystem better, actually they come out a lot lower in terms of some of those responses. And again, when we talk about customer centricity drivers there on the bottom left, you can't see the first answer there, but it's actually create a more personalised experience. I know a number of us have been talking about that today, but striking partnerships with other industry players, that's down there in the list of priorities. Also, job creation has fallen amongst telcos in the last couple of years. So in terms of actually hiring in new talent, the number of telcos doing that's actually fallen as a percentage of what they're doing in terms of their human capital. And R&D levels also remain pretty low amongst telcos. Quite interestingly, you can see in Western Europe, and it's jumped up a bit in the last couple of years, but still very low, 1% mark in terms of R&D expense as a percentage of overall revenue. That's very, very low if you think about how prone to technology disruption the telco industry is. So thinking a bit about organisational agility and sort of trying to think, I guess, quite sort of philosophically about this, but how can telcos maybe engage with OTTs in a different way? These are fleet-footed, fast-moving companies, right? Well, there's got to be risking to fail. A good example would be Rovio that created Angry Birds. Angry Birds is actually their 49th game. Nobody remembers the previous 48, it doesn't matter, right? It was just that one hit that they needed. And that was their cultural mindset to put out games, to learn from experiences, right? And innovate accordingly. Horizontal decision making also important. Shorter time to market, right? And you think about shifts like software-defined networking or networks functions virtualization. All of these designed to shorten product development cycles. Telcos right now, it's 12 to 18 months. You look at the OTTs, far, far quicker. So, what would we say, sort of taking all of this in terms of, outlining sort of steps that, telcos can take? And I think in a lot of the preceding presentations, we've heard, particularly actually in the survey results, around, is it about revenue growth? Is it about loyalty, churn reduction? And I think, looking at the kinds of services that telcos are offering right now, it's important right at the outset to get that rationale for the service out there. Is bundling a long-term strategy? We're seeing a lot more moves now towards sort of light pay TV or OTT TV, great examples in the UK at the moment. How's that going to challenge or, players with those significant sort of content rights to justify their price premium? Are there going to be changes in regulation around rulings around must-carry content, for example? There are going to be disruptions there. So are you increasing the ROI on your core service when you're innovating? Are you creating additional revenue streams? Are you actually just going for a better understanding of internet innovation? Because when we asked operators what are their top actions for improving their operating models, 44% said they need to drive a better understanding not only of their customers but also the market and their competitors. This is a really complex space. Are operators doing enough there? And maybe some final set of messages based on some of the research that we've done at EY about how operators can maybe grasp innovation better, maybe make the world of OTT work better. Well, sort of looking at the VC model, maybe that needs to change. If you look at venture capital arms, right, they've been around for 15 years. Does the rationale there need to change? Are VC funds looking for a strategic partner, or are they just looking for a great business in its own right? Assessing incubator go-to-market options is important as well. You know, there's a lot of this going on right now. It's a pretty new feature in the sector. It's designed to drive learnings from OTTs at a far earlier stage of their own product life cycle. But again, how does that align with venture capital, for example? Can you use a third-party incubator, someone like a Rocket Internet, again, to speed innovation at a global scale? What's the role of R&D in the future? Right, the role of leaner, more open R&D in the innovation agenda. Again, how does that impact on legacy org structures? And going beyond joint product promotion with OTTs, so delineating between that rationale to partner, which is often a defensive mood, but actually to create one's own services that are OTT-like. And we're starting to see a lot of players do that too. But also, what can future technologies do? Stefan, I think you picked up on LTE broadcast, right? But that massively improves the economics of TV delivery over mobile. You know, what are operators doing in that space? There have been some trials in a number of markets. How are R&D programs influencing that? And again, making the most of internal talent as you move to an arena in terms of that shifting dividing line between hardware and software in the network. You know, are you retraining your network engineers to make the most of that? AT&T is at the moment. You know, arguably that sort of network-led innovation is just as important to create the best kind of service delivery in the future. So that's the end of my little piece. Yeah.